freedom from God, Periyar and religion. It is hard to establish the exact origins of Periyar's atheism, but it is worth discussing in brief the historical context and Periyar's own personal journey. Aloysius argues that the arrival of colonial modernity opened up new spaces for Dalit subaltern groups. Religious mobility, reinterpretation and reshaping of the existing religions, reviving of suppressed and forgotten ones, invention of new ones, and even renouncing of all religions was resorted to by such groups. The Madras Secular Society, which originated from the Hindu Free Thought Union, was very active for a decade between 1878 and 1888. They criticized Hindu scriptures and reared the Asuras and the Rakshasas as the native Dravidians who opposed Aryan domination. Critical debates on the Hindu religion, whether it was to be reformed or done away with altogether, took place in the last decades of the 19th century, spilling over to the 20th century. Further, Dalit subaltern intellectuals rediscovered the Buddha's teachings for the greater purpose of expressing the modern value form of egalitarian fraternity, solidarity and identity of the larger and inclusive society. One such important figure in this period was the erudite Dalit scholar Atheism, whose propagation of emancipatory Tamil Buddhism greatly contributed to the school of Dravidianist thinking. I will discuss Periyar's approach to Buddhism in a later section of this paper. The Tamil poet Bharathidasan's Iranayan Alathu Inayatraviran Iranayan, The Hero Without Parallel, was a popular play in 1934 that revered the Asura Hiranyakashipu as a noble figure and saw Narasimha, the man-lion avatar of the Hindu god Vishnu, as a deceitful being. In the play, the Asura is seen as representing the once subjugated Dravidians, whereas the god and his avatar are nothing but a hoax. Similarly, several plays were also composed by pro-Dravidian writers glorifying Ravana, the Asura king and prime antagonist of the Hindu epic Ramayana, despite attempts at state censorship. These readings aim to subvert the Aryan socio-cosmic order of the Puranas. Not only the secular rationalists, even non-Brahmin Saivite thinkers in the 19th century saw Ravana as a primordial Dravidian person, who was lauded as egalitarian, casteless, exemplary in moral terms, a democrat avant la lettre, while Rama was seen as the anti-democratic oppressor. Social critics of this period identified the creatures called Rakshasas in Ramakatha 2 with indigenous inhabitants of the south, whom they classify as Dravidians, and glorified Ravana. Richman 2008. p. 14. The influential Neo-Saivite thinker Mere Malay Agital criticized the Kamba Ramayana for distorting reality and fooling the masses into believing in fabulous and fantastic tales. Vathis 2015. p. 244. Periyar operated in such a socio-political scenario. Periyar was born in a religious, conservative family, in the intermediate Balai Janatu caste. Periyar's father Arod Venkatappan Naikar was a devout Vaishnavite. He named his second son Ramasamy after the Hindu god Rama. Little did he know that Ramasamy would later earn a reputation in Tamil Nadu and elsewhere for being the most trenchant, relentless critic and declared enemy of the god he was named after, and for pledging his loyalty to the cause of Ravana. Periyar had but a 5-year formal education from the age of 6 to 11. Part of the reason why his education was stopped was because of his rebellious streak, which made him defy caste boundaries and ritual prohibitions and fraternize with lower castes. Sami Chidampa, who wrote the authorized biography of Periyar, says that, as a teenager, Periyar used to mock the gurus, mendicants, and priests who visited his house to seek favors from his father. After facing troubles at home, Periyar decided to try the life of a wandering mendicant and traveled to Kasi. Facing the brunt of casteist discrimination, he was denied lodging while Brahmin mendicants were provided, and also witnessing the vices of the priests. He lost what little respect for religion he might have had. One can argue that Periyar's pilgrimage to one of the holiest places of Hinduism converted him into its inveterate enemy. Chidampa speculates that two local personalities might have influenced Periyar's approach to religion and politics. One was Narutaya Pillai, a Tamil scholar, a strong opponent of caste, rituals and religion, who also belonged to Periyar's hometown Erode and was known as a blunt and bold intellectual. The other was Ramasamy, a fierce critic of Brahminism. Not much further is known about these personalities. K. M. Balasubramaniam, a contemporary of Periyar, calls Periyar utilitarian with a vengeance, and that while rationalism, atheism, and socialism are milestones in his career, the central theme that runs through them is anti-Brahminism. In other words, Periyar was an atheist because he was anti-Brahminical. Periyar set out on a tour of Western countries in December 1931. He traveled to England, France, Germany, Greece, USSR, Spain, and also Egypt and Turkey. He interacted with socialist groups in Berlin and Madrid. His longest stay in the West was in Russia, where he was greatly impressed by the socialist project. Periyar toured the Soviet Union for about 3 months, between February and May 1932. Venkatachalapathy provides an elaborate account of Periyar's travel in the USSR and his fascination with the Soviet socialist model, especially its promotion of atheism. Venkatachalapathy 2017. Pages 102-33. Periyar also registered with the Anti-Religious Propaganda Office in Moscow. On his return, Periyar published translated works advocating atheism and socialism like the Communist Manifesto, Bhagat Singh's Why I Am an Atheist, Bertrand Russell's Why I Am Not a Christian, Lenin's works on religion, Robert Ingersoll's essays, and so on. His Soviet trip cemented his commitment to atheism. While he enthusiastically supported socialism, he was averse to the Indian Communist parties for being dominated by Brahmin leadership, which would, he thought, not destroy but perpetuate hierarchy. Periyar was fundamentally opposed to organized authority, even if he occasionally had to negotiate with it. Despite his stated sympathies towards the USSR, he did not believe that the Soviet model could be replicated in India without removing Brahmin supremacy and Hinduism. Periyar wrote in his party paper Kudai Reshu on the 7th of June 1931 that the non-Brahmins and the untouchable castes 3, the poor and the working classes, if they desired equality and socialism, needed to destroy Hinduism first. In a speech in Colombo reproduced in Kudai Reshu on the 30th of October 1932, he urges the rejection of God, religion, and nationalism in favor of humanism and self-respect. He further said, "Only in a country where there is no devotion to God or the nation-state will there be people who do not suffer without proper work." He condemned patriotism and nationalism for keeping the masses ignorant of affairs of other people in other countries and for preventing a global unity of the people, as recorded in an article on Kudai Reshu on the 20th of November 1932. More than 2 decades later, he would write in Vidyafale, another party paper, on the 3rd of December 1957 that the assumption that Hinduism is their religion and that India is their state led to the downfall of the Tamils as a nation. In 1969, he described his mission as the following: "I am a reformer of the human society. I do not care about country, God, religion, language, or the state. I am only concerned about the welfare and growth of the human society." Periyar was militantly atheist and believed that religion and God were harmful for a progressive society. Yet, in certain contexts, Periyar recognized the strategic value of conversion, and he endorsed Islam and Buddhism. I argue in a later section that between the two, Periyar was more sympathetic to Buddhism, as he did not view it as a theistic system, but as a philosophy of rationalism. 3. Bakunin, against authority. Mikhail Bakunin, a leading figure in the anarchist movement, was a contemporary of Karl Marx and also one of the strongest critics of the Marxist variety of socialism. One of the key criticisms of Bakunin against Marxism was in its assumption that state power could be appropriated by the working class and be used as a power to replace former capitalist power. Chomsky notes that the question of conquest or destruction of state power is what Bakunin regarded as the primary issue dividing himself from Marx, further adding that Bakunin anticipated the oppressive bureaucracy of such a state. Bakunin believed that power and authority tended to reproduce itself, and even the creation of a workers' state would inevitably create a privileged class that would work against the interests of the majority. The essence of this anarchist tradition was that power is always illegitimate, unless it proves itself to be legitimate. Newman defines anarchism as an unmasking of power and argues that to the anarchists, The state was an autonomous institution with its own logic, and, thus, it could never be a neutral revolutionary tool. Further, to the anarchists, freedom can never come through the agency of authority. Bakunin considers reason and rebellion as an innate faculty of humankind, and believes that these should be mobilized in a struggle against both divine and secular authority. He believed that the very essence of religion is the disparagement of humanity for the greater glory of God. To Bakunin, the power to think and the desire to rebel were the faculties that differentiated man from the ape. Yet, social power gave birth to two institutions that prevented people from the full and free exercise of these faculties, namely religion and state. Bakunin's main target here is Christianity, given that it was the dominant religion in Europe. In a brief but passionately argued section, he undertakes a hyperliteral reading of the Bible. To Bakunin, the biblical God was certainly the most jealous, the most vain, the most ferocious, the most unjust, the most bloodthirsty, the most despotic, and the most hostile to human dignity and liberty, while Satan, the arch-fiend, was the eternal rebel, the first freethinker and the emancipator of worlds. He sees Satan as an emancipator who compels the first humans to think and rebel against divine authority. Bakunin, who obviously does not believe in the historical credibility of divine scripture, nevertheless uses it as a reference point to prove that this divinity is constructed on unjust, immoral principles and hence must be rejected. We will see how Periyar uses a similar strategy with respect to the Ramayana in the next section. Bakunin believed that the lack of critical education in Europe kept the masses, especially in rural areas, in the thrall of religion that over time, obedience to priestly authority became a mental and moral habit. Further, the miserable conditions brought about by capitalism in Europe made the poor seek refuge in alcohol and religion. Debauchery of the body or debauchery of the soul, the third and only valid alternative for genuine salvation being the social revolution. To Bakunin, the essence of every religious system was impoverishment, enslavement, and annihilation of humanity for the benefit of divinity. And further, the idea of God implies the abdication of human reason and justice. It is the most decisive negation of human liberty and necessarily ends in the enslavement of mankind, both in theory and practice. God and religion are thus a condition of man's slavery and an impediment to his freedom. Inverting Voltaire's famous phrase, Bakunin says that if God really existed, it would be necessary to abolish him. In a sense, Bakunin was a child of the Enlightenment insofar as he believed in the supremacy of reason over religious beliefs. He did not reject the role of social power provided it was democratized, for instance, the power of society to regulate the behavior of its constituent individuals from doing harmful activities. This power, he believed, became less effective as a universal moral authority and served the interests of particular cliques when it became invested in, and the exclusive property of, oppressive institutions, most notably, religion and the state. In this, he saw irrationalism as a weapon in the hand of the statists, be they theological or secular, to dupe the masses and curtail their liberties. Privilege and power for an elite class would lead to their tyranny and, thus, the only valid and universal social law was the law of equality, the supreme condition of liberty and humanity. 4. Defying the Hindu god and the Hindu state. Periyar also believed that an elite class in India stood in the way of the law of equality. This elite class, the Brahmins, used the Hindu religion to ensure their superiority in society, and the state was an instrument to cement this. Pandian details how Periyar used the dominant narrative of Hinduism, as shaped by Orientalist scholarship and the native Brahmin intellectuals, to conflate Hinduism with Aryanism and Brahminism. He attacked the Hindu religion for degrading women, the lower castes and the Dalits, and for posing obstacles to their emancipation. Pandian argues, setting up rationality and religion as oppositional, he also claimed that self-willed reason alone could restore the real worth of those enslaved by religion, treating reason as the foundation. He applied his rationality to religious texts and mythologies, and read them literally to show them up as tales of fantasy. He debunked religious practices, rituals, festivals. In short, basing himself on rationalism, Ramasamy engaged with Hinduism as a unified field of false beliefs. fundamental thematic similarities with Bakunin can be observed here. Periyar saw religion as an institution of social power that privileged the Brahmins as an elite caste group to the detriment of equality and liberty of women and lower castes in the Hindu hierarchy. Periyar located the oppression of these groups not merely in class terms like Bakunin, but also with respect to their marginalized identities. He believed that Hinduism was incapable of self-reform and that only its removal could once and for all eradicate casteism. In a pamphlet published in 1944, Periyar outlined his utopian vision of what would replace religion. He believed that science and rationality would displace God, and that the West was setting an example of such a society. Along with God, states, wars, money, slavery, and oppression of women would also end, and there would be a universal community where the oppression of any would provoke the indignation of all. One of the key obstacles in the journey towards this utopia were the Hindu religionists, who were mired in superstition and an admiration for mythical pasts. He saw the campaign for rationalism as vital to challenge the Hindu religionists and empower the lower castes. In his words, "What I am doing is not political work, but a work for rationalism. Rationalism must spread among the people. Rationalism must be taught to those people who have been brutally oppressed, and they must be humanized." Rationalism was the life of humanity, and this life was denied to the lower castes by the Brahmins, God, religion, and the scriptures. Periyar was critical of both the Brahmins and the non-Brahmins who upheld the Hindu religion. He argued that the imitation of Brahmin practices has resulted in our degrading and enslaving mankind and making women walking corpses, calling for an end of such traditions. Ramasamy in 1992, p. 97. He routinely condemned the Hindu epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and the Hindu Puranas for their degradation of women. Locating the evils of misogyny and casteism in the Hindu gods, he called for their abolition. Echoing Bakunin's rejoinder to Voltaire, he says in an article on Cod irrational dated the 17th of February 1929, "It is said that God created untouchability. If that is true, the first thing to do would be to abolish such a God. If God is unaware of this cruel practice, then he should be abolished sooner. If he is unable to prevent this injustice or stop the unjust, then he has no business to exist in any world." Periyar mercilessly lampooned Hindu scriptures and myths in his speeches and articles. The newspapers he edited, most notably Cod irrational and Vidyathale, routinely carried satires and caricatures about Hindu gods. The Hindu trinity of Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva and their avatars, other smaller but popular gods like Indra, Ganesha and Kartikeya, found themselves to be the objects of critical ridicule. Besides seeking to show that the stories of these gods were fanciful and irrational, Periyar and his followers also sought to portray them as upholders of a Brahminical caste order. Of all the major Hindu texts, 3 were given special attention by Periyar: the Manusmriti, the Ramayana, and the Bhagavad Gita, a key reason being that all 3 texts attempted to transcend sectarian affiliations among Hindus and present a unified Hinduism. It is worthy to note here that no less a person than M.K. Gandhi placed the Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita at the core of his Indian national imagination, while other more conservative Hindu leaders saw the Manusmriti and its rigid social code as a guidebook for an ideal social order. Ambedkar launched a rigorous and critical attack on these texts, especially the Manusmriti and the Bhagavad Gita, and his work also greatly inspired Periyar's critique of Hinduism. Periyar, however, gained considerable notoriety for his radical rereading of the Ramayana and his inversion of the Asura Ravana as a lower caste hero. That there were several other diverse, non-canonical, even transgressive readings of the Ramayana have been recorded by Richman. As far as 20th century Tamil Nadu is concerned, Richman notes that the proponents of a separate Tamil state identified with Ravana and that Periyar read Ravana in this political context as a paragon of South Indian virtue. Ramrai, literally, the rule of Ram, was seen by prominent Indian Hindu leaders as an ideal state characterized by perfect justice, order, and stability. Ramrai has been invoked by literal and metaphorical readings of the Ramayana and has been used by Hindu liberals and conservatives alike as a past utopia that serves as a model for a future nation-state ideal. C. Rajagopalachari, a prominent Congress leader from Tamil Nadu, thought that the newly independent Republic of India should strive to recreate Ramrai, a vision of society he admired deeply. Rajagopalachari, a contemporary of Periyar, also published popular retellings of the Ramayana in both Tamil and English, which continue to have good sales in the market even today. In Tamil Nadu's politics, especially with regards to religion, he and Periyar were seen to be in opposite camps. The Times of India, in an article on the 29th of September 1954, called their long-standing disagreement a battle for religion, with Periyar representing iconoclasts relentlessly preaching godlessness, and Rajagopalachari representing God-fearing people urging with great zeal the need for piety and faith. One could be excused for thinking that Rajagopalachari stood for the Devas and Periyar for the Asuras, their enemies. Periyar vocally challenged the projection of Ramrai as an ideal state. To Periyar, Ramrai was symbolic of the supremacy of Brahminism against the interests of the lower castes, of North Indian Aryans over the South Indian Dravidians, of patriarchy over women's liberation, of hierarchy over equality. Paul Richman argues that to Periyar Ramrai was a pernicious Brahmanic fiction designed to keep non-Brahmins from challenging the status quo, challenging liberal and conservative Hindu leaders alike. Periyar read the Ramayana as a fictionalized account of the historical Aryan attack upon and subjugation of Dravidians, and he sought to demythologize and discredit the epic. One could ask why Periyar should engage with Ramayana and its concepts in such depth if he did not believe in it.